I think just knowing other people are struggling with this too, and it's normal, was one of the most powerful things for me, because I felt sometimes like I was drowning, like I was failing because I didn't have it all together all the time. And you're like, nobody does.
Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Michelle Okere, a Métis-Cree leader who is dedicated to community empowerment and social change. Her impact spans multiple leadership roles, including but not limited to executive director and CEO of multiple organizations, co-founding the REET Institute, and serving on various committees, all of which is driven by a passion for equity, diversity, community empowerment, and a commitment to creating meaningful change on a global scale. Given her experience, I'm excited to have her share her insights with you. Welcome, Michelle. I was listening to your episode on the Relentless podcast, and I just had to say, I'm so inspired by your story because you've had to overcome a lot. And I've never heard of this term until recently, and I wanted to use it for you, where it's like, you're a BAMF, so BAMF. For those who don't know what the heck that means, just go Google it. But anyways, in that episode, you shared that at a young age, you knew you wanted to run some sort of organization, whether it's as a CEO or executive director, both of which you've accomplished. So you mentioned that you cold contacted roughly a dozen executive directors / CEOs, asked them, so what did you do? Any advice for me? What would you do differently? Would you be a mentor, etc.? So I'm curious, if someone were to cold call you today or message you on LinkedIn and ask you the exact same question, how would you even address that?
Well, thanks for having me on, Angela, and thanks for doing your research. I actually am a mentor, and it's actually been something that's been really important to me. Of course, shocked that anyone would even be interested in coming to me for advice when the first person did, but it was a great opportunity to pay it forward. Because like you said, I actually decided first year out of university, I was in my first job, I was doing community engagement for a charitable foundation, and I just thought, wow, these organizations are having so much impact. And I want to run one of these one day. If I'm going to be here, I want to be all in. And it was, a pretty lofty goal at 22, 23, thinking I should run one of these things. However, work in the not-for-profit sector, really looked at, who are the leaders, the admired leaders in this space, and how can I get where they are? And I did. It was kind of the early days of LinkedIn. I reached out to these individuals completely cold. But, I think when you're young and you're driven and, you're willing to listen and take that advice in, people want to help. So every single person that I reached out to, whether it was a cold call of someone in Toronto on LinkedIn or someone in my own community to just say can I get coffee and pick your brain? They all said yes. And to me, that was such a pivotal moment in my career development because they gave me the roadmap. They said, if you want to run a not-profit or charitable organization, you need to move into fundraising. Community engagement's great, but that's not what's going to get you where you want to go. You need to get involved with your local AFP chapter, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. You need to work towards a CFRE designation. That's your Certified Fundraising Executive. And, here are some other things that you can do. And I really followed that roadmap. And I was incredibly blessed that at 29, I got my first CEO role, which is not the case for most people. And quite frankly, about a decade before I was expecting to be in that position. But that also led to a lot of opportunities for me to start giving back. One of the first things I did when I moved to Edmonton 6 years ago was I joined the Peter Lougheed Leadership Club's mentorship program. And so they offer a really unique opportunity for undergraduate level students to do some additional kind of leadership training. They get connected with leaders in the community who mentor and support them. And then they also are given a paid kind of applied project that they get to do with an organization. And so through that, I actually had 5 different students do their stretch projects with me, and I got to mentor them through that. It was an incredible benefit, obviously, to my organization, a small nonprofit here in Edmonton called Compassion House Foundation that was, as you can imagine, going through very challenging times through 2020, like most organizations were. And we were able to leverage the expertise of these young people who wanted to get into the weeds and really start to develop themselves as leaders and to do the work. And so we were able to build out and pivot a lot of our online work through that time, through their work with our organization. So I am all about giving back to the next generation if there's opportunities, whether that's a coffee meeting or ongoing mentorship or just a one-off kind of quick advice if someone just has a question. And I hope that everyone really thinks about how they can do that.
My ADHD mind is on steroids right now. As you shared your story, I'm like, there's so many paths I can dive into. And where I want to double click into is the part where you became CEO at age 29. And also you're an entrepreneur as well. So there's those two facets that come into play. And I'm just curious, at one point in time where you're like, oh shit, this is real now, right? Like, how am I going to like manage this? Like, how did you kind of walk in and be like, you know what, like everything I've done today, like I'll figure it out?
Necessarily say I had that confidence. I mean, there's the drive to get there and there's everything that leads up to it, right? You're doing all of these things so you can get in that position. And then you get that offer and you start day one and you're like, oh my God, can I do this? Like, what? Do they know who they hired? And, I was very fortunate. I will say, I actually remember meeting with the treasurer of the board. She wasn't on the hiring committee. But she said when we met, she was like, I had no idea how young you were. Because all the hiring committee told us was that, like, they talked about your accomplishments. They talked about the reasons why they thought you were a good person to bring into the organization, everything that you were going to do and help us move forward. I thought with your resume, you were so much older than you were. But she was also a young woman. She had two young kids at home. And for her, she was like, it was just really cool to see that wasn't a bias through that process. Because they were all like retired or close to retirement, top of their careers, and that didn't become a barrier for me. But you get into the organization and you are working with people who have, some have had careers longer than you've been alive. And now all of a sudden you're the boss. And that can be really challenging, right? You have to get over your own kind of thoughts and challenges around that. But then you also have to build trust and rapport within the team as well. And so, of course, I put on a brave face all the time. And I really did lean on their experience and expertise. I did not by any means come into the organization pretending I knew everything. We had a manager who'd been there for 17 years and she had lived experience and she was beloved. And why would I take anything away from that, right? I was there to learn from her and support her. And that's generally your job as a leader, right? Your job is not to go in and change everything or do everything. It's, if there's things that might be holding the organization back, you look at how you remove those roadblocks, you look at how you support your people and put them in the best position to succeed. And, you handle some of those really pivotal relationships and kind of the high level strategy and that piece. And so I think once I figured out my role and felt secure in that, it was a lot smoother. That said, I started in the summer of 2019, went through, strat planning, budgeting process, and we started our brand new fiscal year at the beginning of March. And roughly 2 weeks later, we were in a global pandemic. And we were serving a very vulnerable population with women with cancer who were staying with us. And so that created a lot of its own challenges because there was no roadmap. I talked about, I had these great mentors who provided me a roadmap. There was no roadmap now. We were outside of kind of the purview of AHS as far as like, we weren't a medical facility. We also weren't a hotel. Like we were this gray space in between. And we wanted to make sure we were doing everything we could to stay open, but also keep those that were under our care safe. And so it was a huge time of really just not knowing and having to trust a bit of, your intuition, but then lean into the networks that you had as well. And I think that was probably the most important thing for me because through that time, I became a part of a kind of a collective. It was a forum group of other executive directors and CEOs. I think we all recognize like we were struggling through this time. Our boards, most of them, were professionals who are running organizations and they're dealing with all of the unknowns as well and trying to navigate their own organizations through it. So they didn't have the time to really invest in ours. You're in this kind of unique space all of a sudden in that you used to be part of a team. And now everybody reports to you and you report to a board, right? So you don't have to manage and keep a level of calm within the organization. As much as you want to be open with people, you don't want to create this like unnecessary fear and anxiety that like, oh, the leader has no idea what they're doing. And so to have a space like that to go for 3 hours once a month and just talk about the things that we are dealing with and work through them together, And even if you don't come out with a solution, I think just knowing other people are struggling with this too, and it's normal, was one of the most powerful things for me, because I felt sometimes like I was drowning, like I was failing because I didn't have it all together all the time. You're like, nobody does. And I think as a leader, that's really important. And also as an entrepreneur, because a lot of entrepreneurs go it alone and they don't have those networks of support, to recognize that, yeah, you know what? Lots of people are struggling with their bookkeeping. That's why you hire someone to do it for you, right? You didn't get into this because you're a great accountant. You got into this because you're great at the thing that you do, right? So, I cannot say enough about the value of creating a community around you of people with shared experiences.
Speaking of that community piece, I can only imagine how difficult it was during that time to turn to the community and be like, we kind of need a little bit of money just to make sure we can take care of those that we promised we would, while everyone else is trying to figure out their finances with what was unknown. So what was it like managing or leading through that from a community, board, and then a team perspective as well?
Yeah, I want to maybe start with community, because I think a lot of people at that time were questioning, especially in the charitable sector, like, can we ask for help right now? A lot of people were being laid off. There was a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, many people were hospitalized at the time. And it was like, is it in bad taste to ask for help right now? Is it in bad taste to ask for donations? And we sat back and we really mulled over that. And ultimately, I mean, I have a fundraising background. I've spent a lot of time with donors and community. And what I find is that more often than not, it's an opportunity for people to feel some level of not necessarily control, but contribution in times of crisis. It's why when there's a hurricane or a fire or something like that happens, there's such a strong response, right? The text to donate, the big concerts that are held by well-known musicians. And there's the response because people feel out of control and they're like, how can I help? And so we just invited people in and gave them a way that they could help. And because we did that, we had such a strong response from community. It started with something small, like we couldn't get access to like very basic supplies, PPE, toilet paper, hand sanitizer, things that made sure we could keep the house open and safe. But you literally could not get your hands on toilet paper. And we had 16, 17 women staying in a house at the time. That does not work. And so we just put a call out to community for some of those like essential pieces. And we said, if you can drop it off at our back door, amazing. If not, like a financial donation would be wonderful. The response that we got was, it still actually chokes me up to think about. Because I think on the one hand, you saw society slowly dividing. You saw some of the negative rhetoric and things that were happening online. And I got to see the absolute best in people. The response in that first week, we actually had to go online and say, stop bringing stuff to the house. We're becoming the hoarders. Like, we can't take anymore. We had an entire office downstairs that was filled to the brink with some of those essential items. And then it moved to people donating online. And it ended up being such a successful campaign for us. And a lot of people actually thanked us for giving the opportunity to do something, because they had felt so out of control, right? They see their friends and neighbors losing their jobs. They see, they're working from home, and there were people who didn't see that impact from an income standpoint, right? Maybe their businesses were actually doing better than they'd ever done before. Not everybody necessarily struggled financially through that time. And a lot of people felt at maybe a level of guilt or a level of responsibility, and like, what can I do to help others who are maybe struggling at this time? And we gave them the way to do that. And it was so wonderful. But I will not pretend like everyone was on the same page around that. And it could have gone the other way, and I would have absolutely been to blame. But ultimately, we all got on the same page there. When it comes to, like engaging staff and the board through that time, I think we just really looked at how do we leverage technology in the best possible way. And we all had to, if I say pivot one more time, but we did. We all had to pivot through that. And we really focused on just continuing to build that kind of like safety and trust amongst our team, which was really critical in getting us through that. And we came out of that pandemic actually financially in a better place than we went in. We never had to close our doors. We never ended up in outbreak status. And we actually ended up expanding some of our programming because we were able to leverage technology and leverage some of those relationships, like with the Peter Lougheed Leadership College.
It's incredible what you and your team and the community were able to do during that time, especially, again, that population that you were servicing, like they needed you. And before I jump into the capacity piece from an organization perspective, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that fundraising skill set, because I was listening to another podcast earlier and they were talking about, if you want to be able to sell your skills, generally it's around how do you help a company make more money or cut costs. Generally, those are two of the main areas that organizations really need help with. So what have you learned from a leadership fundraising capacity, but also from your entrepreneurial selling? And you also sometimes have to raise capital for whatever product or service you're growing as well. So again, if you could offer a piece of advice as to how you can thrive in this space, what would that piece of advice be?
More than anything, relationships are everything. I think that people want to focus on the next like marketing campaign, the next ice bucket challenge, the next whatever, right? Regardless of the space that you're in, you're always looking for this like big breakthrough. And the hard work is just building strong relationships with people. Because like if you continue to put into those relationships that piggy bank, when you need something, people are so quick to respond positively. And so I think for me, that's just been the foundation. So whether it's giving back to community through volunteerism, sitting on boards, raising funds for organizations, being there for a friend when they need it, whatever that looks like, just continue to invest in people so that when it comes time and you need something, you know they're going to be there. And people rarely let you down.
I'm going to double click into that piece too, because a part of your story that I heard on the Relentless podcast that I resonated with is being an older sibling and just growing up in an ethnic family. Usually we take on that burden of, we'll be here for you. We got you, anything, right? And then that translates into our career, how we show up in athletics, like all that stuff, right? It's really consistent behavior. As much as it can be a strength, it can also become a detriment. So how has that kind of helped you grow as a leader and also be able to filter out, okay, you know what, maybe this is a not now, or hell yes, I'll help you out here.
Yeah. And I think even beyond that, like am I needed to fix this right now, or am I needed to maybe ask the right questions and help you get there yourself? Because I think as an older sibling, and especially, depending on your background, you may be looked at to almost act as a parent sometimes, right? You may be looked at to problem solve. And sometimes I think I got so into that role of like a fixer that when I got into a leadership role, I didn't always know, right? Like, where do I need to take more of a coaching approach to leadership? And where do I need to jump in? This needs an immediate response. Let's remove that barrier. And so it takes some time and some understanding and some experience to get there. And sometimes it just takes asking the question, like, what do you need from me right now? Do you want me to help you solve this? Or do you just need to talk to somebody? And I think that goes beyond just like leadership in the workplace. I think with friends and family and other things like that, it's oftentimes people just need to work through it on their own and come to their own conclusion. They don't necessarily need your advice or even your feedback on it, right? That's not what they need at that time. And so I think really taking that time to work on yourself as well is really critical to understand even why you feel that way. Not to get all psychology, but I remember doing some work, I think it was like 2019 or 2020 with a therapist and looking at, what are my limiting beliefs? And mine was, I believe I need to be everything to everyone, right? Like I need to fix everything. I need to help all the time. And those are behaviors that are actually consistently praised, right? Like being the helper, being the doer, getting stuff done. And that's wonderful, but it can also have some detrimental effects on you as well as the people around, because you're not really enabling others to do things for themselves. You can create some dependency and things like that. And so I had to recognize that for myself and work through that and find value in other things. And I love to give back still, and I love to be a doer, but that doesn't have to be entirely who I am.
I'm going to dive into that piece where you talked about how do you enable others around you, and specifically in the context of building capacity within your organization. Because whether you're a new leader, like you said earlier in your story, where your direct reports are significantly older than you, have much more lived experience, or it's they were hired to do the job, but you're like, I feel like I can lean in and help you out here kind of thing, right? So through your leadership journey, what would you say is something that has helped you develop capacity with those around you so that you can ultimately enable your organization to thrive?
I really had to learn that everybody requires a different leadership style, and situations require a different leadership style. I really love situational leadership. I think understanding where people are. And so it looks at, when someone's new in an organization, they need a lot of support. We just hired someone, a communications coordinator. It's her first day in our organization. I was meeting with her right before this. I met with her this morning. I'm taking her for lunch tomorrow, right? She needs a lot of my time because she's getting to know the organization, and she's going to need more direction at this point. But as she grows within our organization, within her role, as we get her some professional development, she's going to need a lot less of that. And we might have a weekly touch base, and she'll let me know what she's working on, so we're all on the same page. And she might need, some feedback on something, approvals, different things like that. But it's not going to be me in there doing and directing the work. But I think really like where you want to get your organization, especially as a leader, is that those people are, everyone's rowing in the same direction. They understand what our strategy as an organization is. They know what our operational plan is. They understand how their role is contributing to the mission, how they're going to be evaluated. They have regular check-ins and feedback, but you're not there like controlling every aspect of the work. And my goodness, if you were you're not an effective leader, you're not getting things done, you're not driving the organization forward, because if you're so focused internally, you can't be building those key relationships externally. And I mean, speaking in the context of the charitable sector, my key role is building the brand, right? Like increasing awareness of the work that we're doing, things like this, as well as fundraising. So those are probably the two most important things that I do, in addition to obviously working with the board, setting the strategy, and just making sure we're all headed in the right direction. I cannot spend the kind of time that I need to outside of the organization if I'm deep within the operations every single day. And so that also means maybe letting your ego go a little bit, right? This idea that you have to have your hands in everything, or that you become a bottleneck as well. So looking at your organization's structure, I see organizations, I was looking at one the other day, there was an individual that had 16 direct reports, a COO who had 16 direct reports. Can you imagine that, Angela? What on earth could you get done in a week if you had 16 people reporting to you? Nothing, right? And I'm like, is this working? They're like, no. I'm like, how do we fix it? Right? Because there's just no way it could, because you do become a bottleneck. People can't get the approvals they need. They're not getting stuff done. They're frustrated because they don't feel empowered in their roles. And then you also then have this other level of like your CEO and governance who have no information as well, because everything's stuck with that COO. And so it's not creating a structure in an organization that's conducive to getting things done or to building capacity and people feeling confident in their own roles. I also think it's really important that when you're bringing people into an organization, or whether you come in and you're somewhat new at an organization, that you look at what are those gaps that we have, right? How are we filling them? Is there internal talent that we could be building up? And not always looking out, right, to say what are some of the goals and aspirations of those who are already within our organization and have dedicated a lot of time to that? Do we have a professional development plan for them? Are we investing in their future? It shouldn't be that, there's a few people within the organization that have funds for things like education and conferences and professional development and no one else does, because you're not setting your organization up for success. And then how are you bringing them into the appropriate leadership conversations and building that capacity as well? So again, looking within the not-for-profit space, are there opportunities for them to come in and present to the board on the work that they're doing? Get that face time, right? You don't have to be barrier between them or prevent those relationships from happening, because you're not going to be at the organization forever. And when you're gone, my goodness, I hope that there's a look at the internal talent and that we have a succession plan in place, and there's opportunity for growth and development for anyone within the organization. Otherwise, you end up in this situation where people are jumping from one organization to another in order to move up in their careers. And I hate to see that, but it happens a lot. And it's not just within the not-for-profit sector. You see it in the tech sector, it's all over the place. And so how do we create environments where people see themselves with us long term, that there is a level of loyalty and the pride in the work that they're doing, because it is a reciprocal relationship?
So many great golden nuggets there. And one part that kind of came to mind is how did you as a leader, because Sometimes if you grow within an organization from like individual contributor to team lead to manager to executive director, you almost have time to develop your strategic muscle. How did you manage to be able to pivot so well?
Before I became CEO of Compassion House Foundation, I was the regional manager for MAD Canada. I worked remotely, part of a national movement and organizations. We had our head office in Toronto, but I had quite a few significant pieces under me. So I led all of our MAD chapters and community leader groups throughout Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I did all of our public relations, so I spoke on behalf of the organization. I did our government relations in the 2 provinces, which was actually quite unique. That generally would happen out of national office, but because I had some of those relationships from previous work, it was kind of trusted to me. And then I did our fundraising as well. And then I worked with those, 200 plus volunteers across the 2 provinces in building capacity within them. I did training. I worked with them on their annual plans. So I had a kind of a unique opportunity to really build some of my leadership skills in that way before jumping in to the CEO role. Now, that said, of course, it's much different. It's not like I went from being within that organization, I was maybe a director or a VP or something like that, and then I moved up and I knew how everything worked. It was very, very different. And even, in that role, I think the unique thing was I came in and the previous leader had been there for over 11 years. And so that's a big change for the staff too, right? They're used to things running a certain way and we had different styles. And so that requires some level of accommodation on my side and some level of kind of growth and development and acceptance on their side. And we had to work through those growing pains, but we did. So I think the other things that I did were just investing in my own professional development as much as I could, looking at what are the courses that I can take around leadership. And that's something I've done for quite some time because I had that goal since I was, 22, 23 that I wanted to be in that role. And so how do I set myself up for that? Looking at volunteer opportunities to, contribute in different ways, take on small leadership roles to hone those skills. And then even investing in things like governance training so that, I understood the board of directors role and how I could support them. That said, everything's really great in theory. It's a totally different situation once you're in the ring and you start taking those punches. So you learn a lot of things on the fly. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the lessons in leadership that I learned were through leaders who weren't really great. I saw things that I thought, gosh, I would never want anyone else to feel the way I feel right now. I left organizations, and most of us do, right? We leave because of bad managers, not because we don't love the organization, the mission, or the work that we're doing, but because it just becomes a situation that's untenable. And I think more often than not, when I just go to myself and I say, like, what response would I need in this moment? How would I want my leader to react? How would I want to be brought into this conversation? And when I mess up, like, how would I feel if I was left out of that conversation, or if I was blindsided by that, or whatever that looks like. And if someone comes to me and says, like, hey, this happened, this is how it impacted me, I'm the first person to say, I'm so sorry. Like, first and foremost, that was a miss on my part. I think as leaders, accountability is so critical, and you actually diffuse a situation very quickly by taking accountability. It has to be meaningful. You have to mean it. It's not just like, I'm going to say sorry because it diffuses the situation. But if you have a level of, your self-awareness, I think that you can see, oh yeah, that did impact that person in that way. And you can reflect on that. And you can then talk about, like, how do we ensure this doesn't happen again? That builds trust with people. And when you build trust in that way, like, your organization can take on a lot of things. Those relationships can take on a lot of things. And so that would be probably for me the biggest thing, is just being very self-aware and accountable as a leader is going to take you really far.
I appreciate you sharing that. And as we slowly wrap up our conversation, I wanted to ask you, through your experience helping underserved people and consulting on DEI strategy, if you could leave leaders with maybe one thing to kind of pay attention to right now, whether it's a challenge or, hey, like, you want to pay attention to this, what would that be?
I always hate these like one thing questions because I'm like, how do you summarize it all? But I would say more than ever, just checking in with your people, taking that time. I think so often we make assumptions about things and we make decisions without really connecting with people. And so, especially in today's day and age, whether it's stuff that's happening on social media, rumors that are making their way through the office, whatever that may be, take the time to truly touch base with people. There's nothing more powerful than a face-to-face conversation. And like I said, that high level of accountability will take you far, but you have to mean it. You really do have to mean it, and people can tell when you don't. So meaning it means there's meaningful action that follows. So if you've identified that there's a challenge within the organization, that you've aired, that there's a policy issue, whatever that might be, rectify that right away, because that is what is going to build the strength and the trust within your organization, your people.
Really great advice. And it's not just another employee survey where you do absolutely nothing with it. So that was a really great call out from the accountability and follow through in that piece. And my last question to you is, what is one thing that is top of mind for you right now, where if an individual would reach out and they're like, I don't know where to start and how to connect, what would you offer them?
I think one of the biggest things I struggle with on LinkedIn now, and it's actually across a lot of social platforms because everyone's selling something, is people get into what they need right away, what they need from you, rather than taking the time to build some sort of relationship. So I would say, as often as you can, even though there is likely something you need from that individual, take the time to get to know them first. And you can, now everything's on the internet. You were able to do a whole bunch of research for this podcast in advance. Google them, find out a little bit about their interests, reach out to them and show that you've taken that time. Hey, I recently watched this podcast that you were on, or listened to this podcast that you were on, or I saw this interview on CBC, or I was reading the article you were featured in here, and this thing really stood out to me. I would love to pick your brain on that. I would love to learn more about that. I'm so inspired by your journey. If you take the time, just a little bit of time, to reach out and do that in a way that is authentic, you're going to get a way better response than if you give me 3 pages about you and your business and what you need from me. And I think most people feel that way, because it's not uncommon that you get a request on LinkedIn immediately followed by that DM. And it's so clear that the person is just self-interested. And I think that turns all of us off. We're very busy. So how do you make yourself stand out? Take that 5 minutes. I promise you it will make all the difference.
I laughed when you were saying about that 3 pages, because sometimes I receive those messages. I was like, what the right? Does anyone actually say, yeah, I'm going to pay for this service, or I want to talk to you, when you did absolutely no research, and I'm probably not your target demographic. But Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and your insights. I really appreciate it. And to everyone else that's tuned into another episode, thank you so much for your time and attention. It means more to me than you'll know. And I can't wait to stay connected on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.